What's up guys, my name is Ace, and it looks like slide canceling is not likely to be returning to Modern Warfare 2, and this is now coming from two different sources that have played the game early. The first source is coming from Swag, and this is from a couple weeks ago. I didn't feel like this was quite enough to make an entire video on, but I'll just play the little clip here for you.
There's no slide cancel?
Not like how you think it is.
So that right there seems to imply that at least something has changed with slide canceling. It's not the same as what we're used to with Modern Warfare 2019, as well as Warzone, and to some extent in Vanguard as well. However, he didn't really dive into any more details regarding slide canceling because I don't believe he's actually supposed to be talking about any of that at this point. But just yesterday, we had somebody else that's played the game early, FaZe Zuma. He talked with a lot more detail regarding slide canceling and its effectiveness in Modern Warfare 2 based on what he's seen and played. So I'm going to play the important clips here. Just keep in mind his perspective is coming more so from the competitive side of things, and he was largely referencing the hand injuries that people have been seeing in the competitive scene due to all of that repetitive stress with slide canceling. Let's hear what he has to say.
I do think the new game is going to help with the hand problems because you can't really like slide cancel into fights anymore. You just can't. You can slide, but it almost seems like the whole slide canceling and the whole just like people doing it over and over again is just not going to work in this game. Listen, in terms of what I've seen so far, sliding into a gunfight's probably not your best bet. When you slide cancel in the new game, your gun stays down. So there's a delay to get your gun back up. So people are just not going to be slide canceling. I think they did that for a reason. And I think it's going to save some hands.
So there we go. That gives us a lot more detail as to how the sliding seems to be working in Modern Warfare 2's current state, or at least the state of the build of the game that he played. And of course, at this stage, things could change, but it does seem like Infinity Ward has intentionally tried to combat slide canceling by adding a delay. So similar to sprint to fire time, it kind of seems like they've added an additional slide to fire delay, which means you can still slide just fine, especially if you're trying to get away from a target, you're trying to slide into cover, something like that. It seems like sliding is going to be just as effective. It's just no longer designed to be super effective in the middle of a gunfight. Now, of course, it is worth mentioning, once the game comes out and we actually get it in our hands and people have time to really dive into the movement systems in custom games, somebody may be able to find a workaround. Maybe there will be a new slide cancel technique that somebody figures out. So this doesn't necessarily mean there's absolutely no chance there's going to be a slide cancel in Modern Warfare 2. It just seems like they are trying to combat that, and it's at least not going to work the same way that we're used to. And with this topic, I fully expect there to be a lot of mixed opinions. I feel like some people are going to love this, other people are going to hate it. And this is where I did want to share my overall thoughts on this, and I'd love to hear what you guys think in the comments down below. But when it comes to my thoughts on them trying to combat the slide canceling technique that we've seen over the past few years, I'm actually really open to this as long as hopefully some other changes are made as well to compensate for that. And keep in mind, this is coming from somebody that has no problem slide canceling. I definitely take advantage of it far more than people take advantage of it against me. So I'm somebody that technically benefits from slide canceling. And yet, I'm happy to hear this news that they are apparently trying to stop slide canceling, at least in gunfights. Now, don't get me wrong, there's definitely a certain skill to mastering slide canceling. I mean, it is a fairly simple button combination, and it is something that you just sort of pick up over time as a habit. But at the end of the day, it is an extra movement mechanic that does take some time and skill to master, and it gives you a competitive advantage over people that aren't taking advantage of that. At the same time, though, just because something adds to the skill gap, that doesn't necessarily justify its inclusion into the game, especially if it's technically an unintended exploit, which it is. One of my biggest problems with slide canceling is, especially when you get into an online environment, it can be extremely jarring in a gunfight, and in some cases, practically impossible to track. And as a result, I just feel like there isn't much proper counterplay to a well-executed slide cancel. And again, of course, that slide cancel takes skill, but there should be some balance and counterplay to that. And I've noticed many times, for instance, if somebody slide cancels right next to me close quarters, oftentimes it feels like aim assist is actually preventing me from tracking that target because something is misaligned there because the movement happens so quickly. And as a result, this mechanic is essentially trying to break the game in order to gain a competitive advantage. And when you combine that with Peeker's advantage as well, this can cause other issues with slide canceling if you are slide canceling around a corner. And again, even as somebody that takes advantage of this for myself, of course I'm going to. It's one of the meta mechanics in the game. Of course I'm going to learn it and use it to my advantage. I just think it can cause a lot of very jarring and frustrating gunfight situations. And I'd rather see that replaced with something that does have better counterplay and doesn't involve attempting to break various elements of the game to prevent enemies from being able to track you properly, or to ensure that you're getting a massive peeker's advantage when you come around a corner against somebody. And that's not to mention the hand and controller issues as well. Now, this usually just applies to like the super dedicated players, like the competitive players that are playing literally every day for hours and hours on end. But this repetitive motion can be very hard on controllers, very hard on hands as well, and especially if you are playing in the higher levels, you kind of have to do this in order to stay competitive. So those are just a couple extra reasons that I'm totally fine with slide canceling being effectively eliminated for Modern Warfare 2. Now, having said that though, I would hope with this removal of slide canceling in gunfights, I hope they do compensate for this in some way by providing something else that gives a very aggressive player some advantages over a more stationary player. Because inherently, stationary players tend to have the initial advantage in a gunfight, especially if they're already pre-aimed, because first up, they don't have to deal with sprint to fire time. Second, they don't have to deal with aim down sight time if they are pre-aiming. And therefore, in a faster paced game like Call of Duty, there should be some excellent tools to deal with those stationary players, so there's balanced counterplay between those two playstyles. And when we look back to Modern Warfare 2019, if slide canceling weren't a thing at all, I feel the stationary players would have far too many advantages over the aggressive players, and it would actually slow the game down pretty considerably without that tool in the back pocket of an aggressive player. So with this apparent removal of slide canceling, my hope is that we see faster sprint out times across the board, or perhaps better strafe speeds across the board, or maybe remove that movement penalty that you get for firing your gun. This is actually something that wasn't in the earlier CODs. In earlier COD games, especially with SMGs and assault rifles, your movement speed wasn't affected if you were firing or not firing your gun. You had the same movement speed either way, and that made strafing in a gunfight a lot more effective, which was a great tool for the more aggressive players to combat the stationary players because they could use that movement while aiming down sight and strafing, and they weren't essentially locked in place the moment they started firing their gun. If we saw some improvements in these areas, I feel like that could properly compensate for the removal of slide canceling in order to keep up the pace of the gameplay as well as overall playstyle balance. And there we go, that's pretty much it for my opinion on this. I'm totally on board with seeing it removed, but I hope that comes with some compensation for aggressive playstyles. And with that, this is where I want to hear what you guys think about the apparent removal of slide canceling, at least in the middle of a gunfight. Do you feel this is going to be a generally positive change or a negative change? And do you agree with me, if they do make this change, do you feel there should be some compensation somewhere to help out the aggressive playstyles? Just let me know all of those thoughts down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.